So welcome everyone to our AI CRO webinar series brought to you by SalesChoice, and we specialize in achieving revenue certainty. I'm your host, Jen Yim. I'm the Senior Director of Product at SalesChoice, where we bring three services powered by our AI platform to market. The first is Sales Insights, which helps sales professionals with guided insights. Mood Insights, which connects frontline voices to leadership. And third is our Data Science as a Service, where we design, build, and maintain AI models with a focus on generative AI. Over the years, we've been hosting numerous experts, and we've built a big war chest of podcasts, webinars, thought leadership content, etc. And I invite everyone to go to saleschoice.com/resources to check out more. And I also, before I introduce Steven, I also want to let everyone know that if you have any questions for Steven or Cindy, please write it in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And at the very end, there will be a Q&A time, and we can ask those questions then. So without further ado, Steven, if you could please give us a brief intro on yourself.
Sure. So Steven Birdsall, I've been in software for I don't want to date myself too much, but going close to 30 years. It's my fourth time being a CRO right now at Alteryx currently, and before that I was CRO at Qlik, CRO at a company called Radio, which is e-commerce fulfillment and technology, and CRO at Anaplan, and took them public back in 2018. So been around for a while. I spent 15 years at SAP. Most of the time, about half the time as chief operating officer across different regions and then globally, and then the other half in running a variety of global businesses, and then I also ran the Oracle HCM business for a while. So that's me in a background. I'm absolutely excited for the conversation. I hope that we have a lot of questions, and I think as Jen said, like feel free to inject them into the session. And as we kind of go through and present, we'll make sure that we'll look for an opportunity to try to answer those on the fly as well. And then, of course, we've got time afterwards. So it's got a bit of content we'll share, and give you a perspective on things, and then we'll kind of move on.
Mm-hmm. And if you can also just give us a quick summary of Alteryx.
Yeah, Alteryx is, we're a company that's been around for 27 years. You think of us as a company that takes data from a variety of different sources and pulls it into a canvas that's specifically designed and used by business users. So this is not something for deep technologists like a data scientist or whatever. This is for people that are actually running a business. They're in operations, they're business analysts, but it creates a canvas for them to be able to take the data from all the sources, whether it's structured data, unstructured data, semi-structured, enterprise applications, whatever the data source, brings it into this canvas, and then it allows them very easily to drag and drop and create workflows from that data to prepare it, obviously for use, but then create workflows and then automations for scheduling to make sure that you simplify your business. So we have some of the largest companies in the world who use Alteryx. Like I said, we've been around for a long time. We were public and then went private last year with Insight Partners and Qlik. And so that happened last year, and then now we've kind of moved into this next phase of growth, especially around AI. And I can share a lot about what my view is, but also Alteryx as we think about AI. One of the kind of big intractable problems that a lot of companies face today is CEOs want to have an AI strategy, right? They come out and they want to roll something out, and so they typically will run like a ChatGPT or an OpenAI or Llama or some other tools. The challenge is that if you turn the LLMs loose or the agents loose on all of your data, all of your enterprise data without governance, obviously that creates massive risk. There's some information, there's proprietary information for the company around your pricing models, around inventory, around things that you just don't want to be out in the public. And then you've also got PII data for your customers. You have GDPR. Like you have to govern that data before the LLMs actually use it. So we've got we call the AI clearinghouse, but the idea is that even if you're going to store all of your data sitting in a cloud data platform or a data warehouse like a Databricks or a Snowflake, obviously everybody's doing that, which is great. but you want to have governed data that AIs can be, that you can train on, so that it's approved data, approved workflows, and approved, information that has the ability to parse out that, proprietary information or personal information from the LLM, so that it gets trained on the data that you want it to get trained on. So governance, compliance, access controls, all those things is kind of the heart of what most people are trying to address right now, rather than trying to, just turn an LLM loose on all their data. So we're seeing a ton of customer demand all around that, which again, it all drives to AI adoption. It drives, AI use cases. How do they, set their employees up for success with AI on their enterprise application data, not just on public information. Like if you have ChatGPT, obviously, that's great. You're using it, but it's all public information. You really want it to hone in on the information specific to your company, your sales data, your pipeline data, your workforce data, your product data, your, whatever. That the more you can have the LLM kind of trained on your data, then the more applicable it is, and you no longer have like hallucinations on analytics and things like that. Again, I'll get more involved in it, as we kind of go along, but just as a kind of a precursor, I guess, to the conversation.
Sounds good. And I'm going to turn it over to Cindy.
Thanks, Stephen, and welcome everyone. Really thrilled to have you with us, Stephen. Just so everybody gets context, what we're going to do is we're going to start talking about some of the recent research that Alteryx did. They did a global study that Stephen's going to talk to. We're going to dive into the changing role of the Chief Revenue Officer in the sense of more looking at revenue ops perspective, kind of challenging, maybe siloed or operational structures. I'm going to go into then talking a little bit about sort of how AI can be applied for predictive sales forecasting and share some of the insights that we've been able to determine over the last few years. And then we're going to talk to Stephen about sort of stepping back through all these various roles that he's had. What are some of the key, I'd say, nuggets to be a successful CRO, especially in the environment and the context that we have and that we're living in right now? So really looking forward to hearing him share his stories and his sound bites. And then we're going to open it up to questions and answers. So again, like Jen said, please put your thoughts into the chat box. Okay, so Stephen, next slide, Jen, and we'll get underway. Thanks, everyone.
All right. So, first off, and I covered a little bit of this, but what's happening with AI? I think some of this everybody probably would agree with naturally, and other things might be a little bit new, but everything is moving so fast with AI. There's so many new companies that are, kind of spawning. The primary use for AI today is to drive efficiencies in the business, right? How do I increase productivity of my sales team, my customer success, my production, planning, group, my finance team, HR? Like, it's all about creating efficiencies or driving, higher productivity out of the field or out of the organization. Most everybody still uses spreadsheets, right? So no matter what, as you look at any company, whether they're doing business planning or they're doing some kind of financial analysis, spreadsheets still exist. And that I would call either semi-structured or unstructured data. It's just sitting in a static file. It's done some work. You might have an FTP and you're doing some updates to it in some automated way, but it's still a spreadsheet or a relatively small database that's sitting somewhere. That's you're not using that for anything trained. So the role of the analyst, the business user, the people that are actually running the business, the day-to-day, 94% of them that we've surveyed agree that their role impacts strategic decisions, right? And 87% say that it influences the business decisions that have increased over the last year. So we know that the role of the business analyst, the role of the kind of your staff on the ground, are the ones that are driving a lot of these strategic decisions. So with that, data scientists can help to a degree, but it's really going to be about day-to-day, how are people using AI to drive adoption or to streamline their processes in order for them to be more effective in their respective role. And as we drive out these efficiencies, I think that that's going to be probably what AI is going to continue to focus on for at least the next 2 or 3 years. And every company is thinking about it now. They're just not sure exactly how to do it. and certainly not how to do it on their own, kind of governed data. The other thing is that there's incredible career growth, right? The more that you come up with creative ways to solve problems, the way that you simplify your business, in terms of a process flow or things that you do kind of day to day, if you can streamline that, you're seen as a thought leader for your respective area. And what do you get for that? Well, 90% believe AI is going to facilitate growth of their career. So one of the things I thought was interesting was I was at a large customer, big bank, who manages trillions of dollars in assets. They're a great customer of ours. And they had this saying as they were rolling out, again, AI adoption, things like that at the bank. And it's that your role is not going to be replaced by AI. Your role is going to get replaced by somebody who knows how to use AI. And so, I think that's where we see the efficiency. So as companies want to continue to grow their revenue, they want to do that, but not at the expense of growing their OpEx at the same level, the same rate as the growth of the business. You want to grow your OpEx at a lower rate than what you're actually growing as a business, which makes you more efficient, which becomes, EBITDA or margin accretive. Okay. So next, I would say, what are the recommendations that come out of this? Well, AI governance in analytics is like imperative. Everybody's talking about it. Again, I have not had a single conversation with customers where they don't talk about how to govern their data, and they're worried about AI. There's a factor that goes with it. They're very concerned that if they just kind of turn this loose, they're going to create risk in their business. They're going to share proprietary information. They're going to share, information on intellectual property or capital that they have, and they worry about it. So the importance right now is on how do I prepare my data in my enterprise so that it's ready for AI use. So AI can help in terms of data quality. It helps in terms of the way you communicate and document for your employees. The AI, workflow automations, all that has to happen. And those are the top 5 things that came out of this survey from the research. So next, so what do we know from that? What does that then translate into? Next slide, Jim. So it means that people in my role, the CRO, is changing. I think it's fair to say that most CROs have transitioned over the last, 5 years, maybe even longer, into more data-driven, decision making. So as we think about technology and the way that we're using it, whether it be for planning, as I build out my territories, my quotas, or I think about capacity planning, I think about, whatever I'm doing, obviously that all has to be driven by data. The challenge is that we still do a ton in Excel. I think every company out there uses Excel way too much. You rely on Excel, and it's only because there's not enough technologies that are out there to kind of adapt to what your world is. I think the strategic orientation today is, again, as I think about growing our business, how do I do that without growing my expense, at the same rate? That means that you have to simplify everything you do. My SDRs have to be more efficient, more effective. The inside sales teams have to be, more efficient and effective the way they run their territories. Same with our distributors, our indirect channels. All of those organizations need to operate at scale in a very efficient way. And I think AI is going to drive a lot of that, but the only way it's going to happen is if revenue operations or, any of the data that's been preset or has been cleaned and prepped and ready to use, like that's going to be step one. The next, though, is training everybody in the enterprise across the whole company on how to be AI literate. So I think in the past, there's this whole kind of time that people spent on the analytics side to teach, all of the employees how to be data literate. I think it's a totally different step to be AI literate, because the way that, I think about solving my problems today, and regardless of what role, I'm talking about, I think people come in and they have this idea of, well, I'm going to use AI to kind of solve this problem. And the more relevant we can make that, the more we first make it in a muscle memory so that everybody kind of thinks AI first. Like, here, I've got a problem. I want to run a new sales play, and here's my territory, here's my quota, here's my revenue plan, here's my pipeline, here's my customers, and be able to roll that into a sales play, and use generative AI to create the sales play that's more effective for your respective customer base. Like, that would be huge, right? Everyone would love something like that. SDRs would certainly love it. Becoming AI literate and how to use that is obviously critical to that step. But the other thing is just making, your own system data available for the rep in a very structured and streamlined way, so that, again, regardless of whether it's structured or unstructured, they're able to leverage that in order for them to solve the problems that they're facing. So that's the changing part of the role. So again, it's evolving, and it's evolving in a way. On the next slide, we'll see. So first off is, how do I go from tactical to more strategic? So I view it as there's like 5 different levels the way we think about it. So one is there's, anarchy of the data. And so that's where you don't have anything defined in terms of your operations, the roles, supporting sales and marketing, customer success, they're not aligned. You kind of have chaos or anarchy. The other is, a very siloed approach. So each of the teams kind of operate independent of one another. They operate in vacuums. And so while they may be efficient or they may be operating for their respective function, they're not kind of across the entire organization. Level 3 is where you get a lot better, right? So this where you're aligned, you align all the different functional teams together. Tactically speaking, you're now operating kind of efficiently. The way you communicate, the outcomes, the way that you leverage all these teams, you eliminate all the redundancies. So you've connected all the different data sources. So the ways that people are making decisions are now kind of streamlined. That's, those are all tactical things that I think everybody on the call, everybody who's listening to this, you got to think about where you are in the organization. Are you much more tactical in one of these 3 levels? Or on the other side, are you more strategic? And on the strategic side, think about it where you're leveraging all the information. You're very streamlined as a team, but you've moved beyond that frictionless environment that you're trying to create, and you're now moving in a more strategic way. So you support, all the different revenue functions as a RevOps team, for example. So marketing, consulting, customer success, all the different revenue functions. You're more disciplined in your approach. You know what your ideal customer profile looks like. You've built programs and initiatives that drive to that. So as you think about growth, whether it's on a geography level or whether it's at an industry or a customer segment, however you think about growing your business, you've got strategic plans in order to drive that. Once you have all of those things, the kind of final stage is revenue acceleration. And to me, this is all about, now that I've got an efficient organization, I've finished all of the tactical things I need to do, I'm more strategic in the way that I think about how I'm aligning. How do I then accelerate that, which is adoption? How do I increase the adoption at that strategic level to make sure that everything that I'm doing, I'm going to streamline? When you operate in silos, when you operate with chaos or anarchy, you cannot move into revenue acceleration, regardless of company size. Like, you just can't do it. The role of revenue operations, I think, has evolved. I mean, in the beginning, it used to be called sales operations. Back in like 2000, I remember when I started at SAP, we kind of created that sales ops function. That evolved into more business operations, which is kind of in a broader scale, not just sales, but some of the other indirect channels and things like that. And then it moved into revenue operations, which is all about how am I driving revenue across all of the company. So whether it's customer success and consulting and sales and indirect channels, having RevOps kind of stratify the whole group makes a lot of sense. And then what's happened is the technology has caught up to it. So if you look at, businesses like Clary that are very focused on forecasting, they've expanded beyond that as well. So just like Collective Eye or People.ai, like there's a lot of, companies that are focused on forecasting as a function. They've kind of evolved. If you look at territory management, you have like Linen Cloud, who manages territories and quotas. If you are looking at, sales, obviously CRM, all those things have evolved. Now, what's interesting is with the role of agents that are getting built, the role of all of us, every single one of us on the call, is going to be impacted, because agents are likely, most people believe agents are going to replace enterprise software to a large degree. And what does that mean? It means that now people are going to be addressing specific things that they want to do as a function, as a specific thing that they're trying to achieve, and agents are going to be driving a lot of that. That means the role of software is going to evolve. And if you add that to AI, so you have agents, you have LLMs, there's going to be a lot of this that's going to be self-reflecting or tools that continue to iterate on their own. And as those tools iterate on their own, they're going to be engaging with customers in a more material way. So think of the role of the SDR, for example. There's already agents today that are available to do the role of the SDR. Like literally they can do voiceovers, they can do, they can roll out things in an automated way. Like there's things that AI is coming up with at the agent level, and companies like Google Cloud is creating an environment so that it's very easy to use their platform to create agents, and all those agents will talk to the other agents. You can buy that within the marketplace on GCP and deploy that in the cloud. Like those things are automated. If you look at the role of name slipped my mind for a second. But anyway, the software itself is now being, written directly by AI, Anthropic. So you have, tools that are out there that are automatically developing software. So the role of the R&D team is now kind of evolving as well. So I don't think any function of our businesses, especially in software, is going to be, that won't be impacted by AI. Like every single function will be impacted. And again, as we kind of move to this, simplified, streamlined way, our growth trajectory on the revenue side will continue to grow as long as we have not, knocked down our silos, move to a more strategic direction, and thinking about the way that businesses are going to be run. So that's how, we think about it. The other way is, you can go on. So if I think about revenue ops, I mentioned this earlier. So it used to be very siloed. You'd have marketing and sales and customer success kind of all operating independently, kind of in a vacuum or in a silo. And now the role of RevOps is across all those different functions, you still have all those different sub-functions, and RevOps kind of owns that whole thing now in many cases. So RevOps, does operations, enablement, insight, tools, and then you've got sales where you have sales management, AEs, BDRs. You need to be operating in a much more streamlined, way. And that means that the function of revenue operations has evolved and changed. They're now much more integrated, which is, again, critical or crucial for AI. Okay. So next, is the evolution of the forecast accuracy. So Cindy, I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll go through your point of view on things. Maybe you can kind of build on what I had, what I shared, and then we can talk about how that relates then back to questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephen. I think there's so many aspects of what you've just shared, but I think when I think through some of the big points, which are critical, is we really have to get the data provenance right? And there's, it's not like it's a new topic that underlying AI is the quality of the data, but with certainly moving into, intelligent agents, the complexities here and having the right software platforms that can control and manage the risk and, having that broader clearinghouse structure, the registration and knowing the life cycles and also the rules of the game. And it does mean that the business leadership really need to have, I'd say, far more depth of knowledge of data labeling practices. And I think still see that that's a gap in many organizations. There is a design aspect to getting this right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in our company, but from the context of the evolution of the journey. I'm a former Xerox senior GM, ran a pretty large region, former Accenture partner, and have a doctorate in applied AI. And, the area that we specialize in is very much around the CRM arena. So the whole discussion on RevOps is very, very appropriate. When we look at the evolution of forecasting, it's interesting because I can kind of date myself. I can go back probably like Stephen. And I remember the days when we had the activity tracking with the sheets, right? How many calls, how many emails? Well, the reality now, I think everybody knows that, software can determine those motions, although many companies still do not have the right workflow logic, to then going to the perspective of, we're looking at the funnel in relationship to win rates and then really trying to think through the coverage to now, the reps putting in their perspective, management then reclassifying. The amount of overhead that goes into forecasting is enormous in many organizations. But, with AI and ML, we have learned, and we can go to the next slide, that you can really reduce probably by about, I'd say, that effort in that forecasting cycle down to probably from 30% of effort that might have been in the overall workload down to probably 5%, maybe even lower, because the science, once you've got the data structures there, can get uncannily accurate. So this is just a simple point of saying the importance of scenarios in getting up-to-date forecasts. Just go to the next slide, Jen. One of the things that we've experimented with that is not exactly, I would call it hard to think about, but it still is a gap in the market. So when you have large data sets, this is a histogram view. There's always going to be patterns across the data set in terms of the range, the statistical range that those attributes are working within. So it's just like, how do you show the visibility of what is the most, I'd say the most important pattern to get to the win? And so with these sciences, you can figure out the spread of the attributes that are in the AMI model, but rather than keep it hidden, expose it to the business so that they understand the spread in relationship to where they are in the context of that attribute, and giving them the opportunity to do some scenario analytics. So it's like, if you think about a new sales professional coming into Alteryx, all of a sudden being able to close their eyes and all of the other patterns of that particular product set, know where they are in relationship to specifically the higher performers, right? What are those overall win patterns? And so it in many ways we need to really, I think, recognize how far we've evolved our intelligence. The issue, of course, is, do people go and look at those patterns, and do they actually change or alter their behavior? That's a very complex area. I think it's important to everybody to understand that out of all the AI investments worldwide, 80% of them are not being sustained. All right. And it goes back to a lot of the points that Stephen talked about, not just with governance, but it's also altering how people really do work so that there is that human and machine interface to drive the adoption. Next slide. Um, can't do a session like we're having if we don't talk about the quality of the data. And I mean, I'm at the point where I just sometimes shake my head. So we finally just built a dashboard that said, you know what? Yes, AI can add value, but let's make sure we communicate to the clients very, very clearly where they are in relationship to their data completeness. And this is just a really good view year over year over year. This was a pretty significant telco client. When we came into the account, long story short, the data was probably around 30% performance in the AI model. That's not too good, right? Not worthy of deployment. But they were curious, and so were we. So we obviously peeled back the onion, and we actually totally redesigned the entire workflow logic from beginning to end to get the quality, but also lock down the workflow logic with really smart benchmarking structures. But you can see now we're now into the fourth year of this account. We're running at 91% prediction of accuracy. The client is thrilled. We're almost in shock. That means on any particular sales cycle, we're predicting at the beginning of the sales cycle their win or a loss accurately. So what that means, your time, and time is precious. And I've always had the vision that everybody deserves to go to President's Club. And everybody hires bright people. We train them, we onboard them in sales. But what's the difference between, getting to that outcome or not? And we now know that, with the precision you can bring, not just for forecasting, but in terms of the coverage, and you can alter the coverage real time. And that's that exciting area of how you can reconfigure things. So I look at Steven's profile. I can see that he's got this personality attribution of this. He's on this account. This account's going south. Well, maybe we should just change the players, just like you do in a hockey game, right? If the goalie's not there at, performing well, we move and switch out. And maybe this is an area where, we as humans can really start to think about the playbooks. And so often we stick with the same playbooks, and Steve, you know what I'm talking about, and we don't play switcheroo. And I know myself in many of the larger accounts where we've had stellar outcomes, even historically, it's because we played outliers. We saw ways of making a difference. So with AI, bottom line, you can see patterns is my main message. But it does require a lot of patience to get to this point, and also to understand the iterations that go on in AI models. AI is not a static game. You are constantly reviewing the model, the accuracy, and as new data sets come in, the complexities of going back to stage one for doing those verifications also has to play out. Next slide, Jen. One thing missing in the market, and I teach AI ethics and law, and if you remember one thing from me, remember this, the regulations will eventually get caught up in the field of AI, right? In the US, we have lots of different state bills. We do not have a unifying legislation at the federal government level. If anybody's here from Canada, we also do not have a unifying legislation. In the EU, the laws are out and they're being verified and fully supposed to be finished by, I think it's August the 25th. Now, what that means is that there will be increased verification and certifications on the methods and tools and techniques. So those black box AI models that are rampant everywhere will come to a screeching halt because there has to be auditable, explainable AI controls. And so you're going to see a whole new generation of inspection go on. So what we did from the ground up is we said we had to be responsible, and any forecast that we said we had to make it auditable, to trace back, to show every single move that was made in the chess move by every single player, and with the predictions to actually monitor over time and track the outcomes. So a tight scrutiny on explainability. And I know we're the only ones that have done that within the predictive forecasting space of putting out clearly the audit trails. So just to underscore, as a CRO, there's going to have to be a far more scrutiny on how do you know what you know and how can you explain what you know. So I'll just leave it at that point.
I'll just pick one thing here. I think because it's really important to me that this to me is like a huge differentiator for Sales Choice. I think the way that we forecast the business in the past is not going to be the way that I certainly forecast the business in the future. AI is playing a much more material role. In the past, AI has been more about taking data that exists instead of having to have a human kind of crunch numbers. I've got AI that crunches the numbers, and that's all fine. Like that works. But what you're hitting on here is a huge differentiator for Sales Choice in that it's not just about the number crunching of AI. It's how do I do that in a way that is structured, that I understand it. There's accountability, there's data lineage. So or forecast lineage, I know exactly kind of where I stand, and I can always kind of go back to the breadcrumbs or to the data lineage to know where the source of that information came. So to me, that's like that this is AI for the future of forecasting, not kind of AI for the past. So congratulations on a huge kind of step forward. But I think you've always had that in mind. I think, like you said, like that's where your PhD is. Like you've always thought of it that way. So to me, I think having accountability along with responsible approaches to AI is how we should all be thinking about it. In one way, like you said, it's going to be governed because we're going to have laws around it, but you don't need to wait for a law to do the right thing, right? We should be doing the right thing as it relates to AI, and I think you guys do a fantastic job with that.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That's always wonderful to hear. It's the gap in the deployments, right? And it's taking time, even internationally, to drive that alignment. But, like you said, doing the right thing, I think, is what's really important from the get-go. Next slide, please. So this is the fun part, everybody. One of the things that in preparing this, I said to Stephen, I said, Stephen, with your panoramic experiences, if you had to just say a few sound bites, what are the main lessons learned about being a CRO? You've had so many amazing experiences and also international, right? Where you've lived in different countries and you've seen how different cultures operate. And now I know you're zipping around and talking to executives of very important practices because AI is expensive. If they don't put in the right architectural constructs, thinking through the AI life cycles, they're not going to be successful. And so I would just love to hear, because we've got an audience of CROs, what are the things that you've learned in your journey and maybe some key other closing comments that you may have before I turn it back to Jen. So Stephen, I'm going to turn this back to you now.
Thank you, Cindy. So for me, at Alteryx, we're all about being AI data ready. And that means it's governed, it's controlled, there's manageability, there's the accountability that you referred to. Because I think, with the AI accountability, like we all have to operate with that level of trust. And trust is, especially as it relates to data, is something that's earned, it's not just given. So how do I trust that the data I have is correct? That's why, like I said, I think it's great that we have, these large language models that many of us have used. But when it's trained on public information, the level of trust in the data that it's telling me about my company goes way down. So becoming AI ready takes an incredible effort, right? I mean, it means it's cross-functional. It has to work across the whole organization. But everybody has to be AI ready, not just sales or not just marketing or product. So in order for you to do that, you've got to have a vision for where you're going, which is what we talk about to all of our customers is these are ways for you to become AI ready so that as agents and LLMs, and many cases they're agnostic to that, and push down data back into a cloud data platform like Databricks or Snowflake, there's an in-between that has to take place that creates governance. So the intractable challenge that we all face is change management. How's AI going to be leveraged? Change management, I think, is the biggest problem that we all face. And I mentioned the large bank that I met with, the whole operations team. There's 5,500 people that were there in operations in this company. And as we think about that, how do we kind of enable them to think AI first? How do we enable them to think about ways that they can streamline their part of the business in ways that is also leveraging data that's good, data that's AI ready? So I think those are kind of first steps. Takes a lot of effort to become AI ready. The intractable problem is change management of teaching our people how to engage with AI in totally different ways. And once we have those, then it's going to come down to efficiencies, and that's the first horizon, as I mentioned. So think about these things in stages. I would say it started in 24. It'll go through probably 26, 27, but it's all going to be about driving efficiencies through the organization. So once you're AI ready, how do I then become more efficient? And that might be things you're doing to address, to expand your addressable market. It might be looking at, a simplified view of your ideal customer profile and kind of executing against that. But there's going to be major benefits that's going to come from streamlining what you do, simplifying it in a way that using AI to drive greater productivity from, your organization. So I think that's where kind of we are today. That's what's going to take us in the next couple of years. To me, I think it's, there's even more important needs to partner than what there ever has been. So how do I take what we do, partner up with others, which is going to add significant value? Because, we're not trying to be, a version of an ETL tool or a prep and blend tool. We're not trying to be an analytics tool. We're trying to encourage and enable companies to be AI ready. And that means there's a tremendous effort that goes along with those lines. You can't build workflows. You can't simplify your business. You can't execute AI without having a platform to be able to do that. So the growth in these partnerships, as we partner with a Databricks, a Snowflake, as we partner with a hyperscaler, GCP, Azure, AWS, as we partner with other enterprise applications that come into the clearinghouse, those are all critical for us. So AI partnerships, it will continue to evolve, but it's even more important today to have the right partners than it ever has been in the past. Because it's not about just creating a new channel to the market or creating new managed service partnerships. It's really about creating new AI partners that are going to enable our customers, our joint customers, to go execute on their AI strategy. And again, it comes down to trust. I said that earlier. You got to trust the people, you got to trust the data, you got to trust, the markets that you're in. You have to trust the adoption of the customers. So all those things, it all kind of stems and ebbs and flows with trust. And again, I don't think trust is, in the case of data especially, it's not just given, it has to be earned. And that means that the results that you show are actually accurate results. So if people are kind of working with AI data and they're trying to solve a problem, if it comes back as a hallucination, like I said, and it's not trained on your, on your governed data that are enterprise, level information, then that's why you get hallucinations and other things. So that's kind of where we see things going. Again, it's a super exciting time. I mean, I think there's never been a more exciting time to be in tech, and I can say that, having almost 3 decades, in this. This goes way beyond the kind of age of the internet that came out in the late 90s. Like this is at a whole new level, and there's not a single organization that will not be impacted by AI, not a single one. So it's fun, it's exciting, but there's a lot of work to do. So there we are.
And I love the fact, Stephen, that you shared so clearly. AI isn't the issue. It's us learning how to use it. I think that's a really, really important takeaway. So for everybody here that's listening, it's more than just Chat GPT. And there, one of the job that kind of left the fastest was prompt engineering, right? There was at the initial stages, but it disappeared very quickly. And because, these tools, you can basically have the AI agents advise you on the most appropriate prompt structures, right? So it's really learning how to ask the right questions and to curate the right data. And I love the fact that Alteryx has the AI clearinghouse construct because I do think in the war ahead, that's those people, the companies that control the data. It's not the data lake, it's all the governance and on the appropriation levels of which user group has permission, and then to basically validate that in the registry. So that the whole registration dynamics, you can see and explain what's happening within the enterprise is really, really big business. And there's been so much effort put into the I'd call it the machine learning model structures that as the industry matures, people are going to recognize very quickly the utility governance. So I was really, really pleased to hear about the AI clearinghouse. Okay, I'm going to turn it back to Jen. I know there's probably a few questions, so Jen, over to you. But thank you so much, Stephen. It's always fun.
Yeah, always.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Cindy. Looking at the questions here. So there's one to Stephen. Based on your global AI research, are organizations taking safety concerns like hallucinations, bias, and job risk seriously enough, especially given the lack of federal legislation in the US and Canada?
Yeah, I think they're taking it beyond serious, like so much so that they're not moving. Like that's what I'm seeing. Like they're afraid. People are afraid. You talk to a CFO, you talk to a CISO, you talk to a CEO, like they're very, very nervous that AI is going to create a breach of data because it's a lot of people don't even want to build or use a public, LLM, for example. They just want to create their own LLM or they want to create their own agents and have it live within the four walls of their environment where it can never be kind of exported out. So I do think that there's like the pendulum is all the way on that side of, of risk aversion to the point where they're not able to take advantage. And what's going to happen is other companies that will take advantage of AI is going to impact their business. And so I think everybody eventually has to catch up. But yeah, absolutely. It's definitely an issue I see everywhere. And it's just, I think they've got to get comfortable that you have the ability to control and govern data, that you can manage access controls, you can manage data lineage, you know exactly where the data came from. Again, if I'm connecting an Excel file to my enterprise app data from SAP, along with information from SalesChoice, along with information from Alteryx, and I'm kind of pulling all that together into a canvas, it's going to be really critical that you've got trust in that information, but you also have to be able to govern it. And you've got to be able to parse out the PII data, the GDPR data, the things that you don't want exposed to an LLM, even if it's an internal LLM. So the workflow process that gets built by AI has to be something that's governed, that has lineage, that has controls on it, so that you have comfortability that that actually is really good data, and it's actually data that I can expose. And then you always have to kind of push it back down into the cloud data platform if companies are using that. They might use GCP BigQuery, for example. It's fine. So push it into BigQuery, push it back into the CDPs, but the governance of that data needs to exist no matter what.
Thanks,
Absolutely.
Stephen. Yeah. And then for Cindy, beyond data quality and your software's role in improving AI, what key insights about revenue operations haven't you shared today that are vital to advancing the field?
Oh, that's a good question. Love to be a bit of a futurist. Well, we've been doing a lot of research in happiness, just so everybody knows, in R&D, and we we're launching now the capability in the revenue tracking to look at the correlations of happy salespeople correlate to win rates. It's a very new use case. We were actually talking to a leading university on doing the research there. But I think we all know the amount of like 30% of sales professionals have a attention deficit disorder. Okay. And we all know that there's high turnover rates with sales professionals. We have highly hybrid workforces, and the speed and also the administrative burden on sales professionals is definitely an issue, right? With not having lots of tools and yet the critical need to focus. So our research has shown that 80% of the reasons a sales professional leaves an organization is often because of the direct manager. And so we do think there's an opportunity within the CRM to really have a pulse of how people are really feeling against very specific sales attributions, i.e., coaching. Do you feel good that you've had a coaching session or not? Do you feel, um, you know, we don't want to necessarily want to always focus in on commissions because I think most reps are never happy totally with their commissions. But the main point here is I think one of the opportunities is to start looking at additional attributions to give you context on whether you'll meet your forecast or not. And I know in my gut, this is an area that AI can help solve. It also can go into broader areas as well we all know the relationship coverage is a great deal, but relationship coverage, you can have lots of conversations that don't convert into a win, right? What we can do with AI is we can mine I would say, not just the sentiment, but the speed of interactions. Like I can honestly say, when I send Steven an email or a chat, I get a response back, usually with really fast. So if you see that within a customer pattern of interaction, you know that there is trust. And in this world that we're in, with 50% of people worldwide not trusting yet AI. I mean, I need to be very clear. I mean, we have a lot to do to get the comfort level up. That there are opportunities where we can get insights on sales coverage through patterning recognition that are absolutely, to me, mind-boggling. And that to me is very exciting, where we can start pulling these really, I call it insightful nuances. And I underscore insightful because we have to be careful in the design. But the piece there on the correlations of personality are, I think, an area that is very, very exciting. And we can determine that without people having to fill out surveys and things. And I think that's very, very important. The data patterns are there. It's now on the design thinking. So that's a big, big, big answer. But, we're moving into a space of augmented computing, right? That bringing in that emotional intelligence, real-time views into the fabric of AI. So.
Mhm. And then lastly, for Steven, in your CRO role, how are you helping sales team focus on the few critical metrics amid today's overload of data and admin tasks?
Well, it's good. So, like most companies, we've shifted our licensing model away from only looking at number of users and into more of a utilization, so a consumption-based pricing model. So that means that instead of customers buying, only on number of users that they count, whether it's an employee or a per department kind of usage, moving that to more edition-based pricing. So you have a basic edition, you get a certain number of licenses and a certain amount of consumption, and then you move into more of a kind of enterprise grade license and then a premium. So small, medium, large, typical t-shirt size. So as we've moved to that, that means that the entire company obviously is very focused on utilization. So telemetry data becomes extremely important as you look at that, because that's going to drive your gross retention. It's going to drive your net retention. How much am I expanding in my install base, et cetera. So I think just the metrics that we use in general, changing pricing models changes the metrics that we kind of look at. I think the other thing is the AI adoption piece is really where, as I go out and talk to many of our customers, are coming up with these incredible use cases. And so if you're a pharma company in Switzerland, and you've adopted, these 12 or 15 use cases for finance, and we then replicate that, and I have a library of use cases that I can then go share with other companies in that industry, in that segment, about their size, like that kind of thing. That becomes very relevant, and we can all kind of efficiently drive those AI efficiencies into the business, and then we're going to get a greater output. So I think the more we can do things like that, of sharing insight, sharing information, lessons learned, those metrics are going to be what drives our adoption going forward. So yeah, it's a very different world that we're living in, which means you got to have different ways that you look at utilization, that drives different customer behaviors, the customer health, number of calls they have, level 1, level 2, like our customer success team is awesome. They're phenomenal. And they go engage directly with customers to talk about telemetry data, to talk about the usage, talk about what they're doing. I think those are all very different than what we've done in the past. Utilization typically meant I've got 90 out of 100 users, therefore I'm at 90% utilization, when the reality is you're not really measuring business value that gets created, which is really what we're all about. So by moving to these different t-shirt size pricing or different editions, it allows for customers to adopt the technology without having to buy 5 more licenses or 100 more licenses. They actually can do it in a very easy way. So very, very different set of metrics that we're seeing in the market today. And AI is going to drive, I'm sure, a lot more as they think about use case adoption, business value that gets created. How do I then rinse and repeat that or replicate it across different companies or even across my own enterprise?
Awesome. And I think that's all we have time for today. We're just about at time. Thank you so much, Steven, for connecting with us today. And I invite our listeners again to go to saleschoice.com/resources for more.